Hello everyone. So this is the MEDIN Online Discovery Metadata Editor, and when you log into the tool, you will be directed to the My Metadata homepage, which is a very nice, user-friendly and simple dashboard. And from the My Metadata homepage, you can view your pre-existing metadata records, which are all listed here. You can create metadata records, and you can import XML for pre-existing metadata records. So with your existing metadata records, to view and edit them, all you need to do is click on the pencil icon here. Um, you can also validate your metadata, export them, so that means download them to your browser, or publish them directly to the MEDIN portal. That is, of course, if they pass validation. So right here as well with the metadata dropdown, you can also create and import. You can also create new metadata records and import XML. The options are available here as well. Um, so you can access them anytime when you're using the tool, really. With the contacts drop down here, I'll actually go through this with you all a little bit later on. And then we also have our account button where you can edit your user information. Right, so I'm just going to go on ahead now and click Create Metadata. And what this does is it brings you to a small form where you can start creating your metadata record by adding the resource type, the title, the abstract, and the resource language elements. And you'll see that all of the fields that have an orange star next to them, these are mandatory fields, which means that they must be populated. Another thing worth pointing out as well is that every field has its own further information tooltip pop-up. So this is just to guide the user if they're not sure about what information they need to give. And it also gives information as well on what the element's requirement level is. In this case, you can see as well is mandatory, which is consistent with the orange star. Okay, as well as that, if you would rather see your further information in a separate tab, you can just click this little icon with the arrow here as well. Right, so under the abstract here, you'll see that there's a handy little character counter because it's mandatory to have a minimum of 100 characters for your abstract. You'll see that this actually counts down as you add some characters in. Um, so yeah, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to start populating these fields using some uh, pre-prepared metadata information that I have from an existing metadata record. So in this instance here, I'm going to choose my resource type. You've got four options. You've got dataset, non-geographic dataset, series, and service. In this case, I'm going to be creating a dataset, which is a geospatial dataset. If I was creating a metadata that doesn't have any spatial aspect to it, such as experimental lab results data or non-geographic socioeconomics data, I'd click non-geographic dataset. But in this instance, I'm going to create a dataset. Okay, so I'm just going to go right on ahead here and add my title and also this abstract here. And I will select English as my language. Okay, so now that all of the fields have been populated, I simply click Create Project. So now that Create Project has been clicked, you will be presented with a metadata form that needs to be completed. It has a nice little tab interface where all of the various metadata elements have been categorized under the relevant heading. So above the tabs, you will also find that there is a metadata record identifier. So that is the metadata records UUID, which has been generated after the Create Project button was pushed. Um, You'll also see that the elements that I added earlier, they have now been transferred into the new metadata form. So the tab we're on here is the identification tab, which as you can see, it has our title, it has our abstract, it's got frequency of update, resource language, it's got web link to resource, which is where you would specify where the user can actually go and find the data that is being described. We also have a data format, which is pretty self-explanatory, what format the data are in. And we have our uh, unique resource identifiers. Okay, so what I'm going to do here now is I'm going to populate frequency of update. So this describes how frequently the metadata record is modified or updated. And if you actually don't know how long that is, you can simply add unknown uh, here. Okay, moving on to web link to resource. So I'm just going to add a web link. So here you can see I've been given a little pop-up information bar here. So it asks for the URL for where the data can be accessed, or at least where the information is on where I can access the data. So I'm just going to add some information here, a nice URL for that. And for the web link name, I'm going to add dataset website. And this for this particular website, you need to order the data directly from the BODC inquiries team. So what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to click add, and you can see that now all of that information has been populated below. Right, so on to data format. So again, pretty self-explanatory. I'm going to choose delimited because it is a .csv file. I'm not sure what the version is, but that's okay, because if you don't know, you can always add unknown. So that's what I've just went and done in this situation. If you do know the version, of course, by all means, add it in there. Okay, on to unique resource identifiers. So this is generally a unique code that is generated and assigned to the resource by the data center that's responsible for the data, or even just the data owner themselves, so that the resource can be identified. So when we click on this here, it's looking for a code and a code space. So the code is the unique identification code itself. So in this instance, the BODC use a coding system called EdMed, so I'm just going to add that in here. And for code space is what you usually add here is the internet domain of the data supplier. So I'm just going to add the BODC website. Okay, so I'm just going ahead and add that in here. Right, and then at the bottom of the page, you have the option to save progress, validate your metadata XML as you go, or delete your record if you need to. One thing to mention is if you click delete, you'll be given a "Are you sure?" option. In this case, do not want to delete my metadata, so I'm just going to go right on ahead and save that now. So now that my identification tab has been saved, I am going to move on to the classification tab. So this is where we add our spatial and temporal information system, information I should say, spatial or temporal information. So the first field is our spatial reference system. So this is where we add the coordinate reference system that was used for the data. The most common of these is usually WGS84. I know that that's what is used by the data that is generally published by the BODC, which comes from the National Oceanography Centre. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose that one in this instance. And populating the temporal reference fields, again, is pretty self-explanatory. You've got a start date. I'm just going to choose a random start date for now. So let's say the data started in May 2024 and as the data set is finished, if sampling finished in August, let's say. Okay, so right. So what we do have here then is the time period identifier. So if you've got a beginning and an end date, you actually must assign a unique identifier to these. Thankfully, the tool has a handy new feature where it'll actually automatically generate a UUID for the time period uh, extent identifier if the user actually wants one. So I'm just going to go ahead and click Create ID, and lo and behold, here's my new identifier. In addition to that, users can also just add their own identifier as free text as well, if they prefer. The identifier only needs to be unique in the scope of the metadata instance. So alternative identifiers can be used, and of course, you can add anything in this field really. Okay, so we have some other temporal elements here too. So we've got date of publication. So let's say it was published on the 15th of last month, the date when the data were last updated. Let's say it was the 1st of May. And of course, when the data was created. Um, so let's see. So this one only really needs to be completed if it's known and if it's different from the end date. So let's see here. Let's say this is usually, my apologies here now. So let's say that was created the day that it was published, which, as I selected here, was the 15th of April. There we go. We got there in the end. Okay, now that I've populated all of these fields, I'm going to go right on ahead and save my progress there with that. So now I'm moving on to the next tab, which is the keywords tab. So all of the keywords in the keywords field, again, they're selectable directly from a drop-down list. So, but we also have it also works as well as a free text search by simply typing in. So I'm just going to let's see here. Type in ocean for the Inspire themes. So I'm going to add oceanographic key features here. So that's all you need to do here. The Inspire themes are a way of categorizing your data set, which is a mandatory requirement for MEDIN metadata in order to maintain compliance with EU Inspire. Moving on to MEDIN keywords. So this is a this calls from the NERC NVS P02 vocabulary, which describes observable properties. So let's say in this instance, we measured temperature. We can say air temperature. Let's see, temperature of the water column. Salinity of the water column. So that's how you select your keywords. And as you can see, this automatically populated the topic category field as well, which, because I selected air temperature, it's added climatology, meteorology, and atmosphere. And of course, temperature and salinity of the water column has populated oceans. Right, we also have a field called Other Thesaurus Keywords, and this is for, you can request to have terms from other external vocabularies outside the tool that you would like to have added in here by contacting the help desk, and they'll be able to have that term added for you. So you'll be able to find their information here. Okay, so now that I've populated my keywords field, I'm going to save my progress. And once this is finished loading, I'm going to move right on over to the bounding box tab. So this is where you add your bounding box coordinates. This can either be done manually here by adding coordinates in for your northwest, south, and east, or you can also go to the map and actually quickly draw your own bounding box around the general sampling area. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. Let's say it was done here in the Celtic Sea where my data were collected. And you'll see that this is then auto-populated the coordinates field in the exact coordinates tab for me, which is all very nice and handy there. Okay, so now that I have that, I am going to go ahead and save progress and move on to the Extent tab. So in the Extent tab, this is where you specify the spatial extent of the resource by populating here the CVOX regions field. So just under this field, there's actually a nice handy little button here that will automatically populate the CVOX region based on the bounding box that you had just created in the previous tab. So I'm just going to go and click that now, and it's selected the Northeast Atlantic Ocean for me. So that has automatically populated that for me, so I don't need to actually go through the drop-down list or search for it manually. I should mention though that this functionality doesn't always get it right. So I believe it was in the Celtic Sea. So I am just going to go ahead and add that, which of course the Celtic Sea is in the Northeast Atlantic Ocean. So don't fully rely on it. If you're happy with what it's come out with initially, then great. If not, just you can add it manually yourself. Most of the time it chooses the correct information based on your bounding box. Okay, so we also have some other optional fields here that you can use to further describe the spatial extent of your data set. So we've got the UK charting sea areas, we've got the ICES statistical rectangles, and the ICES sea areas. These are optional, so you can fill these in if you would like to. But they are not mandatory. So I'm just going to leave them blank in this instance. So next we have vertical extent depth. So if you actually know the maximum and minimum values of the sampling, the sampling depth range of the area where the sampling took place, and also if you know the vertical coordinate reference system that was used, this information can be added in here if it's known. If it's not known, that's perfectly fine. You can, as an alternative, add a vertical extent keyword instead. So let's see here. So I'm just going to choose the water column boundary layer in this instance. Obviously, once you've selected that, the other one disappears, so you can only choose either or in this scenario. But if you do know your maximum and minimum values and the vertical coordinate reference system that was used, ideally that is the better information to give. But if you don't have that information, you can describe it by selecting a vertical extent keyword. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and save that. And with that, I am going to move on to the quality tab. So here in the quality tab, we've got a drop-down list for character encoding. We also have some free text fields with the lineage and also additional information. These are fairly self-explanatory. So first things first, we've got our character encoding. So this is actually set to UTF-8 by default, because that's generally the type of encoding that's used in a metadata record. But if it isn't, you can always remove it and change it to whatever encoding format that was used. Or you can have, if they come in more than one, you can have multiple occurrences. That's perfectly fine. Right. So I'm just going to stick with the default, which is the UTF-8 one. Okay, so again, we've got our lineage, which is essentially the background information on the data itself. So I'm just going to go ahead and pull that information from my pre-existing metadata record that I've been using as an example. I'm not going to add any additional information here, but again, it's just an optional element. I'm going to leave it blank in this instance, but if you have any additional information that you would think is relevant in describing your metadata record, this is where you would add it. So this next field here is our spatial representation type, which describes the method that was used to spatially represent the geographic information of your dataset. There are four options. You've got vector, grid, tin, and text table. So vector, that describes geometric shapes such as bounding boxes, points, lines, and polygons. We also have grid here. So this represents spatial information as a matrix of cells which are arranged in rows and columns, and each cell would have a value that represents information about that location. For example, Jebco would have a grid of, uh, you know, 1 square kilometer, and it would tell you the average depth within that square kilometer, to give you an example. Moving on to TIN. So TIN, which stands for Triangulated Irregular Network. This represents continuous surfaces. So unlike grid, TIN uses irregularly spaced points connected by triangles to form a surface. And this is generally used for terrain modeling. And finally, we've got text table. So that refers to non-numeric descriptive data that's used to describe a geological feature. So this can include things like place names, addresses, and land use types, just to give three examples, and is often stored in tables or .csv files associated with spatial data sets. In this instance, I'm going to choose vector because the data that I'm describing has spatial features such as bounding box, points, lines, and polygons. Okay, and then we've got our spatial resolution field. So this is where you can provide the average distance between the sampling locations in meters. So in this instance, I'm just going to say that each sampling station were, let's say, 500 meters apart. So I'm going ahead and add this and save progress, which then brings me to the next tab, which is usage. So here we have our limitations on public access and conditions applying for access and use elements. So with limitations, so any restrictions that are imposed on accessing the resource for security or any other reasons, you can add your limitation here by clicking on the button. In this instance, you do have a list of Inspire limitations here. This is the button that I've chosen. I'm going to say that there are no limitations on public access. You've got a bunch of Article 13 A, B, C, D limitations from within the Inspire directive. I'm going to select no limitations, and why there's no limitations, I will say 2-year embargo expired. So I'm just going to add that in here. So one thing's worth mentioning here is these aren't very clear what these different limitations are when you choose the Inspire limitations, but you can find the definitions to the Article 13 list here in the Article 13 definitions. You can also add non-inspire limitations as well, which is a nice handy free text field. Okay, so I'm going to close that and move on to the next one. So this is conditions applying for access and use, and this is information on any constraints on actually using the data that's described in this metadata record. So condition information can also be added here in the text field pop-up. I'm just going to go ahead and find that information from my pre-existing metadata record, which has its own license. So it just says usage restrictions are specified in the terms of license. I'm just going to add that in there. Okay, so I'm going to save progress now. Often used conditions can be things like, for example, if the data are associated with anything that is military related, maybe certain individuals who work for certain organizations are the only ones who are allowed to access it. That's another example of what you would use here in the conditions applying for access and use. But in this one, I just mentioned that it's all specified in the terms of the license, which I really should update here. Go back to my pre-existing inspire limitation. I'm just going to say add the information that data are freely available to all following agreements and terms and conditions of the user license. Right, so I'm going to save my progress and we're going to move on to the next tab, which is our roles tab. So here you have the custodian, the metadata point of contact, the originator, distributor, and the owner of the data. And the drop-down list in these fields are actually fed by the online tools contacts page, which you actually have to create yourself by going to add contact. Firstly, I'm just going to click on my contacts live. So this is your contacts listed. This will be in your own personal My Contacts page, with all of the contacts that you have created yourself by clicking on the Add Contact functionality, which you can see in here. So these can either be so when you click to add a new contact, you can create, you have your first name, last name, their position, their email, their telephone, and organization. The organization dropdown is actually fed by EDMO, which is the European Directory of Marine Organizations. So you can select your organization here. So I'm going to choose Oceanographic Data Center here, which automatically populates the email address as well. I'm going to select John Blogs. It's Joe Blogs' less famous brother. It's going to add that in there, and his position will be Marine Data Manager. Okay, so I'm going to go right on ahead and create a new contact. Actually, before I do that, I think it's worth mentioning that if the organization that you're looking for is not on the list, that's not a problem. You can just type it out in free text here, and it will be populated there in the organization field for you. Okay, so I'm going to go and click Create New Contact. Right. So this is all of my list. Right. So I've lost my back arrow here because I'm doing a full screen. So I'm just going to go ahead and get back into my metadata record just by clicking the back arrow. Right, so we're back in here. So yeah, back into the roles tab. I went back a little bit too far. Okay, so as I said, these are fed by the by your contacts list. So here's the one I prepared earlier, John Blogs. We're just going to add him in for every uh, for every field to save time. The custodian, metadata, point of contact, originator, distributor, and the owner will also be. By the way, you can search these as well by just doing that. Okay, so we've got every field populated here. So I'm going to go right on ahead now and save that and move on to the conformity tab. So the conformity element specifies if your data set is conformant with other specifications such as the MEDIN data guidelines, for example. Um, for datasets, series, and services, I should mention it's actually mandatory to reference whether your dataset is in conformance with the Commission Regulation EU 1089/2010 um, uh, regulation. So this is actually an Inspire requirement. So you need to, in order to maintain Inspire compliance, you need to specify whether your data set is conformant, not conformant, or you haven't evaluated its conformance against this Commission regulation. So going to have you can add it on here. Um, so as I said, you can say it's conformant, not conformant, and not evaluated. In this instance, I'm going to say it has not been evaluated. Um, right. And I'm going to add in the explanation on the degree of conformity. Um, Dataset is not, has not against Commission Regulation EU. Okay, so and now I'm going to go ahead and click Add here and save my progress. Before I do that, actually, I should mention as well, you can also declare conformance to some of the MEDIN guidelines, which that may have been used for collecting the data. So let's say that this is a bathymetric data set and we followed the MEDIN data guideline for bathymetry data to a T. So we're going to say yes, data are fully or conformant with MEDIN guideline for, or let's say MEDIN bathymetric guideline. Okay. One thing I should mention here about the date of custom publication specification field. You can add your own custom specifications here as well. They don't necessarily have to come from this drop-down list. You can just type them here in that free text. The ones that are in the ones that are in the drop-down field have a date associated with them. So if you add a custom specification or one that hasn't, just a specification that is in the list, you're going to have to add the date, whereas the date is automatically added for the ones that are in the drop-down list. So I'm going to go right on ahead and add that as well, and I'm going to save my progress. Okay, so this brings us to the final metadata tab. So in here we have 3 fields that have been populated automatically for us, which is great. So if you're happy with everything, you can click save. You can click save, and then you can go ahead and validate your metadata record. So this tool uses the latest schematron, which is for the current for the version of the standard version 3.1.2, which is what this tool is in compliance with. So I'm going to go ahead and click Validate Metadata XML. And as you can see, the metadata record has validated. And once it's valid, the validation page, the tool gives you the option to validate again. Go to your My Metadata homepage, go back and edit your metadata record, the one that you've just been working on. Export your metadata record as an XML file, or publish your metadata record directly into the MEDIN portal. I'm just gonna go ahead and go back to my metadata homepage. And as you can see, those exact same options again as I showed earlier are here as well.